Thank you, Karen. Thanks, everyone, for being here. And thanks, first of all, to SIIA for putting on the EdTech Business Forum. This really is a great opportunity, a very valuable conference bringing together so many large, medium, emerging companies, service providers, investors, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about opportunities in education, but also to learn about so many of these companies that are in the innovation incubators and to see what is happening and what's driving what hopefully will be the next generation of leading companies. I also want to thank the panelists this morning, representing a number of venture capital firms. Really appreciate you being part of this and giving everyone an opportunity to learn from you, what you see and how you see the market. There's been a lot of venture capital activity in the market this year and last year. Most of you have heard about that. Karen mentioned the data that Kevin shared this morning, that more than $1 billion has been invested in education technology this year. That is really exciting, and I really appreciate you joining us this morning. I'm going to go ahead and let you all introduce yourself briefly, and I guess I apologize, I should introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. Chad Johnson with Cherry Tree. We're an investment banking firm. We work with companies between maybe $10 and $200 million. We do buy side, sell side, capital raising. We actually started as a venture capital firm ourselves 32 years ago. We had 4 funds and incubated Capella in our offices. We funded Plato, now Edmentum's buyout from Control Data. I personally worked for Plato for 3 years doing M&A, 2001 to 2004, before going off and running an early stage software company, and then came to Cherry Tree 6 years ago, where we worked with companies including Atomic Learning, Plato, Teleparent, and a number of others. So that's a little bit about Cherry Tree, but now on to the venture capital panelists. And Frank, do you mind kicking us off and just giving us a little bit on your background?
Good morning. I'm a general partner with New Markets Venture Partners based in Maryland. We were founded in 2003. We're a small firm, about 70 million under management. We're actively investing out of 2 funds. I'm the guy who is most headlong focused on education. I have a background as a practitioner in middle and high school settings for about 14, 15 years, and then jumped affectionately to the dark side about 11 years ago, and sort of extending my love of education and belief that there was a need to scale innovation. So we're actively in the market looking for entrepreneurs and teams that are not seed stage, but more sort of Series A and B ready.
Okay, thank you. And Frank, is that purple tie he's wearing? I'm pretty sure that's a Vikings tie.
We'll get to that.
Hi, good morning. I'm Karen Buckner, and I'm one of the partners at MK Capital. We're located just outside of Chicago. We've got a little over $250 million under management. I head up our education technology efforts. I've got a pretty broad charter, can invest anything from pre-K to post-secondary, but my passion's really in the K through 12 space. I've got a cornerstone investment in a company called Apex Learning that we've been in about 7 years, and I think it's given us a good purview of what it takes to really grow and scale a business in the K through 12 market. Like Frank, we typically are kind of first institutional capital, Series A, Series B financing.
Thank you.
Take this one. Hi, my name's Matt Witheiler. I'm with Flybridge Capital Partners. We're an early stage venture fund based in Boston as well as here in New York. And from a sector perspective, we are pretty broad, so we do everything from consumer to enterprise and everything in between. But one of those buckets over the past 2 years for us has been education, and that's resulted in a number of investments in our portfolio. We've got $600 million under management, currently investing out of our 3rd fund, which is a $280 million fund. And some of the investments in the education space that people in the audience may have heard of include companies like Simple Tuition, which is an online student loan lead generation site that kind of helps students with their entire financial process, and a company called Open English, which does online language learning in Latin and South America for English language learning.
Thanks, Matt. Josh?
Cool. So I am Josh Cohen. I work for a venture fund here in New York City called City Light Capital. I have far less money than these guys, so if you're pitching them lousy ideas, show it to them first. We only look for good ones. We were started in 2004, a little bit different in that we don't focus on kind of sectors or growth rates. We focus on kind of problems that we're interested in solving. In safety, education, and the environment. So within education, we're focused on reducing dropout rates, increasing access, affordability, and performance, and are looking for great entrepreneurs leveraging technology who can do that in any sector or manner that they please, so long as they have revenue and want to work with us.
Okay, thank you very much. A little bit of background. I won't go through this in detail, but
everybody can read that, right?
Kevin asked if I could do that in a smaller font. He wanted me to get all $1 billion worth of transactions on one page. Wasn't able to do it. But hopefully you can see this graph. I think this is one of the fundamental shifts going on that is driving the interest from venture capitalists, and I'll let them speak for themselves. But certainly what we see is that there is a broad shift from print resources to digital resources in education. People have been talking about it for a long time. But it really seems to be happening in the last couple of years. Schools are showing a willingness to invest in technology, to change the way that they deliver education and to use resources, whether it's instructional support, assessment tools, and content. And it's pretty exciting. And these are multi-billion-dollar markets that are shifting. So even in an era when school budgets are under pressure, there is a lot of money that is available as schools are, in many cases, taking the opportunity to say, okay, with reduced budgets, how can we do things differently? How can we get more bang for our buck? How can we do individualized learning, et cetera? And so we're seeing that shift. Some trends just that we're seeing in the market from the previous page. Obviously in post-secondary, Karen mentioned there's a lot of interest in courses. There's a lot of interest in student support services. In K-12, we're seeing activity in the LMS space, in social and adaptive learning. And with consumers, which is the consumer tutorial market's another $4.5 billion market, we're seeing a lot of activity in test prep and content, foreign language learning or English language learning as examples of all this. And so with that background, I do want to turn it over to the panelists and start by just asking, and Josh, if you don't, we'll go in reverse order this time. Where are you investing and why?
So we've been looking at education deals since 2004. We've only funded 2 companies. We've looked at hundreds. So in 2009, we made an investment in a company that was then called Tutor. It's now called 2U.
Can you move toward the microphone, please?
Yep. So we invested in a company called Tutor that some of you may have heard of. It's now called 2U. We did that investment in 2009. So we were actually the first outside capital in Tutor. And then I think last year or earlier this year, we invested in a company called Straighterline. And we love having those 2 companies, in part because we love the management teams. They've had success or deep experience in education before. When John Katzman started Tutor, it was a unique time in the marketplace. I mean, he was nuts at that point. At least that was everybody's perception. Just coming off kind of the economic downturn, and I believe that Tutor wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for 2008. I mean, you're dealing with an environment where a school like USC has just lost 30% of its endowment, and the only way to increase revenue was to build more buildings to house more students, and all construction spending had stopped. So here's a guy who was somewhat well known from the Princeton Review, but shows up and offers to pay for a program that adds significantly more revenue at no cost to the university or very little cost to the university. And some may say exploded a unique macroeconomic trend or a moment of weakness, and now that's, by the end of this year, it'll be 8 programs or something like that that have been announced. So we run a very concentrated portfolio. We look at Straighterline as a good complement to Tutor. Tutor addresses kind of the top 15% of the marketplace in terms of higher education. Straighterline kind of deals with the other 85%, the less competitive or non-competitive schools. We've been looking to do a K-12 deal since 2004. We haven't found one as of yet. Greg Gunn from Wireless is one of my partners, and he's been dying to do a K-12 deal. We just haven't found the right one. So we're still looking. We are fairly selective and concentrated. That's what I got.
Thank you very much. Matt?
Sure. So I'll take a slightly different approach, which is that at Flybridge, we kind of made our first education investment in 2006 when we invested in Simple Tuition. But education wasn't really a focus of our firm. It wasn't kind of one of the core areas where we spent our time. And the Simple Tuition transaction actually occurred out of some work that one of my colleagues, Jeff Busking, who started UPromise, did when he was running UPromise. And it wasn't until 2010 about that we said, hey, this education thing is real, and everything that we saw happen to a whole bunch of different industries as far as going online and being disrupted by online providers is starting to happen in education. Now feels like the time. And so in 2010, we sat down and inside of the education vertical kind of created a thesis around what we thought was interesting over the next kind of couple years. One of which being direct-to-consumer education platforms, which is what resulted in the Open English transaction, which I mentioned earlier is online language learning in Latin and South America. And it was with that kind of investment thesis and those pillars that we started diving into the education sector and have looked at a bunch of different opportunities, remained super excited about the space. In particular, since I think the question is, what we've invested in, those are the two kind of primary education companies in our portfolio. We have a couple other companies that play tangentially inside the education sector. But going forward, I think there's still a ton of opportunity. And if you were to fast forward 2 years from now, I would not be surprised if we had order of magnitude 5 to 8 investments in the next 2 years in the education technology sector.
Thank you, Matt. Karen?
So where I spend most of my time really is in the K through 12 space, and in a meeting just prior to this, there was a comment made that content, a lot of people think within the education market is a commodity, and I would say I take the alternative approach to that. We believe that rigorous content aimed at the struggling student is a big market and a big challenge that's out there, and that's really where we've been putting quite a bit of our dollars. So as I mentioned, we've got an investment in Apex Learning, digital curriculum for high schools, where the bulk of our sales are really toward that struggling student. And most recently, about 4 months ago, we made an investment in a company called eSpark, which provides individualized learning programs delivered on the iPad. But to me, it's all about the struggling student that can't be ignored, and I think rigorous, standards-aligned content is going to remain a big market, and so we spend a lot of time there. Just as an aside, MK Capital, we're a sector-focused fund, and I have 2 partners out on the West Coast who spend all their time really looking at digital media. And so we spend a lot of times reviewing deals around digital content aimed, frankly, at the same students that we're looking to educate, the 10-year-olds to 35-year-olds, and watch where they're spending most of their free time and what they're engaged in. Highly engaging, really dynamic content. And to think that that's what they're spending all of their time doing outside of the classroom, and then think that they're going to sit there and be engaged in a traditional lecturing environment, to me makes perfect sense while we've got kids that are tuning out. And so I think it's a real challenge and an opportunity for us to take a lot of the learnings that I see on the digital media side in entertainment, weave that through into the content, but at the same time do it in a rigorous and a common standards-aligned fashion. I think offers a lot of opportunity and upside.
Chad, are we going to come back to the content question?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yes.
My favorite topic.
Fantastic. Frank? Thank you, Karen, by the way.
So a lot of bodies buried along the way. I've been investing in education for 11 years and really decided to leave the classroom and try to find the right boardrooms because I wanted to find ways to scale innovation. Really started through family office and did some personal stuff alongside that. And New Markets has been the last 5 years. So all in, have touched part or full-time 22 or 3 companies. 12 of which have been very positively realized, 3 have been written off, 7 or so are still out there. And we love them all, and we're very proud of all of them. And these are entrepreneurs who are changing education. So I think the split at New Markets is really kind of 50-50. We've made 8 investments since I joined the firm in late 2007. Questar assessment in 2008, large-scale assessment company that's doing quite well out of Minneapolis. We did not make an investment in education in 2009, and like I'm sure Josh and others on the panel, we've looked at hundreds, if not thousands, of companies across that span of time. I think our ratio is like 125 to 1. Could be a little higher these days. Things are a little frothy. But let's see, Moodle Rooms in 2010, Starfish Retention Solutions, the Think Through Math in Pittsburgh. Lou Piccone's here, founder somewhere or another. He was razzing me about my tie. I'm wearing a purple tie. It does not necessarily apportion to a specific team, although it does. I happen to be from Baltimore, so the story on this tie is not, I'll just say this, the story on the tie is not about the team specifically, and yet their performance has yielded ways to win. And I think in education, with the entrepreneurs that we back, we're really looking for folks who find ways to win, because I think we all know that the end user deserves that. So this is about, if you're an investor or if you've been in this industry, a lot of you have been in this industry a lot longer than any of us up here, and you should be lauded for your service to education. I don't have anything else to say except that we have had one realization out of the 8 companies that we've invested in new markets, and that's Moodle Rooms. That's now a wholly owned sub at Blackboard, and I think doing quite well under that ownership. So that's the other thing that we try to do, is really find great companies and try to find great homes for them, and they can be sustained.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we've heard a lot about MOOCs. We've talked about, or we've heard mention of iPads, of bring your own devices. What trends, speaking both to K-12 and post-secondary, what trends and innovations do you think are most worth watching today for the next couple of years? And I think this time we'll start with you, Matt.
Perfect. So one of the areas that I think is really underinvested in and frankly under-innovated in is the whole mobile education sector. So you look at a lot of the companies, and if you look at kind of the history of what the internet has done to traditional industries, be it content or other sorts of traditional industries that were disrupted by the internet when it started and kind of came mainstream in the late 90s, early 2000s, you saw kind of a wave of disruption that the internet brought. And then there was a period where those companies kind of matured in the internet sector. And then from there, they repositioned themselves, and there was a new wave of innovation that was focused around mobile. And that's kind of what we saw with Facebook and with Instagram and Twitter and kind of this next wave of innovation. And so I think what we're seeing today, in education at least, is the internet has kind of come to education and is starting to disrupt the way that education has historically been delivered. And I think what we'll see in a compressed time frame is mobile coming to this industry as well. And frankly, I haven't seen anybody take a very innovative, new, exciting approach as far as what that means. So it's not like I have an idea and I'm up here saying that here's what you guys should go build. It's more around the fact that I think mobile is going to be key to every industry going forward. And in particular, the education space, I think, has been a laggard in history and has an opportunity today to adopt mobile more aggressively and create some really exciting companies. So a little bit of a long-winded way of saying I think mobile's interesting, and I've got a couple other categories, but I probably monopolize enough time now, so I'll turn it over if we have more.
Okay, thank you. Karen, do you follow on?
Our most recent investment is mobile on the iPad, and I do think we're seeing that change throughout the classroom. But I would also add, just as was highlighted kind of in the opening comments, right, the blended learning, individualized approach, I think remains a very hot topic and one that's actually finally getting adopted within the classroom. A comment was made to me, and I thought it was just interesting, right? In our special needs population within the schools, they've had IEPs, individualized education plans, for years. It's a law, everybody has to do that and tailor education to the particular needs of that student. Yet you go into the core classroom and that hasn't been adopted yet. And I think it's really kind of a recognition that you say, hey, wait a minute, we've got for our core students, why should that be any different? Why shouldn't an individualized plan make sense here? And so I think we continue to look via a content angle, but there's others for opportunities to say, hey, we really need to be delivering individualized learning to those solutions. And for me, I'm looking for it as early as possible. One of the things that frustrates myself and our management team at Apex, where we're only involved predominantly at the high school. We transition a little bit into middle school, but predominantly we're a high school solution. It's just that we're getting kids in 9th grade who are reading at a 4th grade level. Why we can only do so much when you get kids that really should have been addressed 5 and 6 years ago. So to me, looking for the holy grail of an individualized program with highly engaging content aimed at the K through 5 level, to me would be something we'd be very interested in, and I think it's a growing trend.
Okay, great, thank you. Frank?
Agree with all that. Those are great trends, so it won't be redundant there. I think that open models, open source models, open content models, MOOCs are open models. Everybody have a MOOC here? Everybody needs a MOOC. Let's make sure before you. And I think that open models will only work if there is granularity around the transaction of learning, around data-driven instruction. So we are looking at quite a few companies that are really trying to change the game at the level, at the groundswell of learning. And I think we'll see more and more of that, particularly as sort of mobile increases in stature.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. Josh, any trends that you would add to watch?
Yeah, we don't really focus on trends as much, and we're not, we don't have a bunch of boxes and say, look, we want to have something in mobile or something in the content space. I mean, we don't view the world that way. I mean, that we got into this space in part because we're parents and my mom's a teacher, and this came from a different angle. So there are two things that we've been focused on pretty strongly, and one is, I don't know if you want to call it a trend, but one is the flow of capital. So you put up the chart earlier, and all these companies have gotten funded, and we've seen a lot of them, and for one reason or another, we're not in a lot of them. And I think that the way I would categorize the flow of capital in the marketplace and our perception of it is that we have a fairly high degree of concern that there is a lot more money available than there is companies that are deserving of funding at this point. And I know that's a controversial statement to make, but I made it for a reason. In part because I think that there is an assumption, I think it's a flawed assumption, that building an education business is analogous to building other types of businesses. I think there is enough that's different in building out an education business, whether it's dealing with the unions or the political influence or others, that require different skills and a different tact in building these types of companies. So, we wind up with fat startups as opposed to lean startups, and we wind up with, different sales skills and people who are selling into available pools of capital as opposed to the way you traditionally build a sales force. So the two things we're focused on that we're analyzing closely are where the money's going, not because we think it's a strong indicator of how the markets are likely to play out, just because it's leaving to us some obvious gaps that we're struggling to realize why they're not filled, and maybe they get filled, we're excited about it, and maybe we have to fill them on our own. And the second thing we're looking at is really what we talk about is the feedback loop. We've seen a tremendous amount of companies that are building businesses that are starting to be focused on traffic and activity and really aren't really doing a good job of analyzing what people are learning. And for people who came from the education world and are passionate about doing this to help learners, we find that trend to be really problematic. So those are two things we're watching. We're not terribly excited about either.
Well, that's actually, we'll hopefully have some time for some Q&A. I don't know that the first comment will be that controversial in this room, because I certainly agree with you, and I think a lot of people that have worked in the space for a long time do as well. Education is a very different business, and the selling process is very different. The capital available, the funding is very different. and those things all come into play. It's a different market to sell into. So
that was the controversial part. It was the part where I said there's more money than talent.
There's more money. Interesting. That may be controversial. But and certainly accountability, I think, is a broader concern as well. The idea of having data and being able to demonstrate what's really working, and how you prove that in education, or how you demonstrate that, that's an area that a lot of people are thinking about and working on as well. Before we move on to the next question, Matt, did you want to add anything? Do you think we missed any important?
I also think in the education sector in general, and maybe we'll come back to the funding point because I've got maybe a contrarian view to everybody else's contrarian view around that. But in this intersection between education and recruiting, I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on. It's quite early in that space, but can I train employees or can I train talent and place them with employees using online or hybrid online-offline models and actually get money from the employer as well as the student or potentially just from the employer because I'm educating their future workforce? I think that's an interesting space that I've been spending at least the past couple months just researching and talking to companies in the space.
Would you fare to... I've heard some people talk about just the idea of certification in post-secondary or for adult learners.
Yeah, absolutely, especially when it comes to trades and kind of hard skills that you can learn. The certification programs, I think, there's a lot of stuff that can be done. There's a huge industry that is offline today, whether it's UTI for technical training for automotive repair or air conditioning repair. There's like this whole offline industry of education providers who have not moved online and provide certification that employers value. So I think it's interesting.
That is, I would agree with that. And I think it's also interesting to see in post-secondary, and I think this gets to the companies like Straighterline, that there are some lower cost models emerging in post-secondary that are pretty exciting as well. Anybody want to add to that before we move on? Frank?
So a couple of us on this panel are invested in Straighterline, a Baltimore-based company that basically for $99 is giving a student an opportunity to ready itself for the longer journey, which today is sort of measured at 4 years. And if you live in a competency-based world, it could be a year or it could be 10 years. So things are changing fairly dramatically in post-secondary. We have a limited partner, the Lumina Foundation, that said to us, can you help us scale innovation? Can you help the degree and certificate attainment in this country move from 40 to 60%? That's kind of their big goal. And so the companies that we focus on, Straighterline and American Honors College and Starfish Retention Solutions, that are around the wrapper of post-secondary, keeping kids in the seat and increasing that throughput, very much a national trend, certainly one of our partners' trends.
Thank you. Anybody else? So moving from innovation to business models in different platforms, that's another word that we hear a lot from the investment community. Which ones do you think have the most value today, and why? And Karen, I'll start with you this time.
Sure. I'm not 100% sure what way you want to go with this, but I'll just share from us kind of what we're looking for in companies and why for many of us, particularly in the K-12 world, we've seen a lot and invested in very few. I think in many instances we come across entrepreneurs who have a wonderful idea and great technology for improving the overall outcomes, particularly at many of them the struggling student. Love their, at the core what they're trying to do. Where I think there's often a disconnect is how does this create value for both the superintendent, the teacher, and the student? And in many instances, we have found entrepreneurs come in at very low price points with a little bit more complicated solution that needs a direct salesperson to sell it. And as a result, there's a dramatic disconnect. We've got an expensive distribution channel with a low price point and such that we look at it and say there's just no way that this is going to be a company It's a great product, but it's not a great company. And so I think as we work with entrepreneurs, and many oftentimes have to turn them down, I think what they're missing is kind of what do we think creates the most value? And it's really being able to create a holistic solution, not a product, that really does resonate with those three constituents and can be priced at a point that can be directly sold. Because there are absolutely models out there that may work from an inside sales perspective, but still within the K through 12 model, that's a face-to-face sale. And as a result, you have to be able to have a broad enough offering and create enough value to support that. Otherwise, you know, the freemium or the $5,000 a school sale can only get you so far. And I think that's really, you know, the disconnect between models that we find that have a lot of value and a lot of the opportunities that we see.
Yeah, I think the way that I'd see it or describe what you just said is, particularly when it comes to selling into K through 12 or selling into higher ed, the biggest challenge and the biggest question, for me at least, tends to be go to market. So like, how do you get it in front of the educator? How do you get it adopted by the schools? And I think that's one challenge that probably everybody on this panel sees with a bunch of the companies that come and talk to us.
Gotcha. And Frank, do you?
Oh boy, yeah, this is a major challenge. I think we've all sort of not invested in scenarios because they didn't have it figured out.
Yeah.
And I think distribution is everything. Product efficacy is also everything. So, and I think actually if you lean to the West Coast, it's all about product. And if you lean heavily to the East Coast, it's all about distribution. And so somewhere in the middle is the answer. I think in today's increasingly cloud-based world, it is definitely both. So we have portfolio companies that have a freemium model, and I know Karen does as well, and it is a challenge. There are certainly conversions that happen from free usage. But at the end of the day, the end user or the classroom is not the buyer. So until that changes, until there is a decentralized structure of buying at the classroom level, it is very much an enterprise sale. All of our companies struggle with this, so we all realize that the outside sales model has to work, and that if we can come up with a lower cost of acquisition inside sales model and a team with a very honed process, that also is starting to work more.
I just wanted to point out that between the East Coast and the West Coast is Minneapolis, so clearly that's where the answer is.
I was just going to add that one of the points up here is platforms, and I think one of the shifts I've seen recently that is attempting to address the distribution challenge are these platform businesses that are trying to get universal adoption, let's say in K through 12. So I think Clever's here somewhere. So like Clever, for instance, get adoption in K through 12 and then use that as a distribution platform for companies. And so I think that's why the whole platform sector is something that interests us as investors, is because if you can be the conduit that is a new distribution channel to these providers, then there's a lot of value to be captured.
Great. Josh?
Yeah, we don't really like freemium. We like people who pay for things. You know, when you find a market where the pain is so acute that people are willing to pay for a solution, that's typically where we like to play. So we don't really love advertising-driven models. We don't like freemium. We like when people pay for the core product or core technology. So if you have a solution that's focused on reducing dropout rates, and people should pay for that solution because it works at reducing dropout rates.
Gotcha. I think that's a fair.
So I don't mind freemium models, and the reason I don't mind them is because what I've seen recently is kind of direct-to-consumer viral type adoption that is starting to happen in the for teachers. So you see these tools that are free, and teachers are increasingly online and networked, and so adoption tends to go up into the right really quickly for freemium type businesses. I agree, if there's no path to monetization, it's way less interesting. But a lot of these instances, you can get kind of the thin wedge in with, hey, we're in the classroom and teachers are using us every day, and we're going to take that basis and the fact that we have 5 million teachers on this thing to start promoting products or to develop our own premium features that teachers will pay for. And you have to buy into that message for sure. But I don't mind seeing freemium as kind of the wedge at which you can get adoption.
more power to you. I'm out.
Yep.
Come talk to me.
That's right. And you have all promised to invest in at least one of the innovation incubators, correct? So, Karen, I think you alluded to it earlier, and I think it's related to this question. Is content a commodity?
I don't believe content is a commodity. I think there are elements of instruction that can be commoditized, but if you are looking for core, rigorous, aligned content that is going to align to the assessment tests in the K through 12 world that many or most of our students are going to be held to, I don't believe that that's a commodity solution. I know how much it costs us to deliver and develop rigorous, engaging multimedia technology or content in courses, full 120 hours worth of instruction. That's not going to be commoditized. I think there are elements of it. You can pick off a 1 minute or 2 minute video here or there, but I think the holistic approach and the scaffolding and what really is needed to be delivered to particularly students who are struggling, I don't believe is a commodity solution.
Thank you. Did anybody want to add to that or differ on that?
No differ. No, that's on Sundays. I would say that actually the focus should be on curation, and so that the content is certainly decreasing in its value unless there is a process by which content can be aggregated, curated, and provided. So I think at our companies, that's where we're focused. I've got a non-new markets personal investment in Flat World Knowledge, which is a company that has a great idea. It's been a bumpy road business model-wise and sort of revenue generation-wise, but the idea that high-quality content can be deployed freely in certain ways is appropriate. And they made the decision to sort of shift a little bit at Flat World. But I think as a universe, what we're seeing is content becoming more malleable into bits and bytes. And that's the challenge that we haven't really figured out. So again, back to sort of the curation and aggregation and analytical side of content and how we bring it together for learning. I think that's really the key, less the content itself.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I see a tremendous pain in the content world, right? I mean, I hope there's not like an eject button on my seat, considering where I'm sitting, but do I think that there's going to be another huge publisher created in the next 10 years? Probably not. Do I think McGraw-Hill's going to go out of business tomorrow? Probably not. So I like Frank's answer. I think that curation matters a whole bunch, but is the question, will it become commoditized or is it today? I think it's trending in a direction towards commoditization. Right? If you look at, Sal Khan's kind of a celebrity in these circles, and he's created some pretty good content for free. And the more people create free content, the harder it is to charge for content. And to the extent there's great content that's free, to me that's a commodity.
Yeah, I agree with both those 2 points. And I think for us at least, we see what happened in music and what happened in publishing for kind of news. And we worry that going forward, the content piece of education becomes a commodity, but it's the value-added services that you add to the content that create something that's protectable and something that can extract value. I mean, at the end of the day, I can go to Harvard and learn from a Pearson Biology 101 textbook, or I can go to a community college in California and learn from that same textbook. And it's not the book and the words in the book that are ultimately differentiating the value of those programs. It's the services that Harvard wraps around their program that makes it a value added and therefore able to extract a significant amount of dollars from students. And so my read of that is that the online world as barrier entry for becoming, everybody can set up a Tumblr or a WordPress and create content, and some of it will be garbage and some of it will be good. As it continues, it's necessarily the words of blogs that will be where the values it's that are able to, whether it's customized learning, whether it's or other services around that content that will create the value.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate you participating again this morning. I believe we're out of really appreciate you taking the time sharing with all of us. And thanks again to IIA for the to be part of it.
No questions.